Welcome to the Navy Memorial SITREP series. Thank you for joining us today. This is our first SITREP of the season of 2022. We've got a great lineup this year coming up, and we are honored today to be starting with the Secretary of the Navy. As you all know, the mission of the Navy Memorial is to honor, recognize, and celebrate the men and women of the sea services, past, present, and future, and to inform the public about their service. And that's what this event is about today, is informing the public. This live, online, on-the-record event is available to naval enthusiasts around the country. As you can see on your platform, you're able to ask questions through the event. I would ask you to ask them early, and then like questions that you see that are most interesting to you, and they will float up to the top. And I have a tablet here on my lap, and I'll be checking out the questions that you all want asked. Before we get started, I'd like to thank our sponsors. We could not do what we do without our sponsors. Our event sponsor today is LMI, a company that provides expertise in digital and analytic solutions, logistics, and management advisory services to their clients. And we have two series co-sponsors this whole year for 2022, Navy Mutual Life Insurance, who provides affordable life insurance and annuities to those who serve or have served our nation, and Dell Technologies, who provide end-to-end technology solutions and digital transformation accelerators to their clients. We couldn't do the great things we do without their support. So now it is my honor to introduce the 78th Secretary of the Navy, Secretary Del Toro, not a stranger to the Navy Memorial, been here a couple times before, surface warrior, career naval officer, successful business leader, and now Secretary of the Navy. It is great to see you, and thank you very much for joining us, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you, Admiral. It's great to be here with you and all the fans of the Navy Memorial, a great institution that really does pay tribute to our United States Navy and Marine Corps.
Thank you. Appreciate those words. So let's start with a little bit of a personal discussion.
Sure.
And so getting to know the Secretary of the Navy. Born in Havana, Cuba. Immigrated to the United States as a young boy. Went to the Naval Academy. Career in the Navy, 22 years, retired, as we say, with a little R from the Navy. Business, started your own business, successful businessman, and now Secretary of the Navy. How's it feel? Tell us a little bit about being the Secretary.
I consider, to quote Lou Gehrig, I consider myself, the greatest man in the life of the earth. It's been a great journey, and I'm so proud and privileged to be serving today as Secretary of the Navy. So grateful to President Biden, Secretary Austin, to the American people for affording me again this great opportunity. As you mentioned, I was born in Havana, Cuba, and came here to this country and lived in Hell's Kitchen in New York, and it's just been a tremendous ride. I never would have imagined I'd be here today, but deeply thankful, grateful, and understand the great responsibility that I have to do right by the men and women of the United States Navy and Marine Corps.
So last week at Surface Navy Association, you pointed out that you're an example for that entire conference, and I've heard you talk about it before, for the nation, of somebody who can do anything in this country.
Absolutely. America is a great country. I mean, it affords all of our citizens the opportunity to excel based on the hard work that you put in and the quality of the work that you put in. And really anybody from the most humble beginnings can achieve anything in this country. They could rise to be President of the United States themselves. And there's no other country in the world like it. And but it does require the participation of all our citizens in many different ways, in many civic ways, to really contribute to the fabric of this great nation.
So as Secretary of the Navy, if I'm not mistaken, I believe you are the first Secretary of the Navy in the modern history who has commanded a warship, commanded a destroyer. That's got to give you a different perspective, whether it's in your office in the Pentagon, meeting with the leadership of the Navy Marine Corps, or seeing the fleet. How does that experience paint your role as Secretary?
Well, definitely in modern history. There was a previous Secretary, Graham Powell, who actually commanded a destroyer during World War II, but it's been quite some time since then, obviously. But I think it's an amazing aspect that gives me tremendous, profound background and experience in how the Department of the Navy works, right? And how, as a surface warfare officer, I spent 22 and a half years living and experiencing what our sailors go through today and through my interactions with the Marine Corps, gaining very valuable experience that affords me now the opportunity as Secretary of the Navy to be able to use that experience to benefit our sailors and Marines in every possible way.
So what's the biggest change? So some things have to have changed, and
Sure.
some things have to have probably stayed the same.
Sure.
From back in your destroyer days, what are the biggest changes you've seen? And if you could add to that, what surprises you that hasn't changed?
Well, the bureaucracy is still there sometimes.
Yeah, yeah.
And that is obviously still frustrating, but that's okay. I would argue that what has changed or has really improved over the course of these past 20 years is how much we truly and deeply care about our people, right? How we make major investments in our people. Not to say that we didn't make them back then as well too, but today it really is extraordinary. We go above and beyond the fold to care about our people in every possible way. So, on a ship, 20 or say 40 years ago when I first joined the Navy, for example, in 1979, we didn't care as much about, hearing conservation. We didn't care about, protecting people from the heat and the environment or asbestos or anything like that. When you look at the condition of our Navy housing, it was horrendous back then. Not to say that there aren't improvements that we need to continue to invest in today, but it was significantly worse back then than it is today. And so this entire investment in powering our people is incredibly important, I think. It's a major change from, say, 40 years ago.
So you've had a chance to go out there and see the sailors now.
Mhm.
So even when you were in business, you were connected with the Department of the Navy. So it's not like you lost connection there.
But a lot of things have changed in 20 years since I left the Navy as well, too.
Yeah. So now you're a secretary. You're out there. You're talking to sailors and Marines, and you're talking about this investment we make in people and all that. If I could just ask you to dig down deep a second, how are they doing? I mean, how
Sure.
are the men and women doing out there? I mean, we hear great things.
Mhm.
We hear challenges of generation. We hear overworked. We hear super motivated. How, in your opinion, how are they doing?
Well, I think overall they're doing pretty well. They really are. That's not to say that we don't have challenges. We have serious challenges throughout our Navy that we have to face dead on and try to make things better. But from my travels these past 5 months, quite frankly, I find morale to be quite high. And I think it's largely because of the investments that we've made in both the platforms and the people, like I suggested. It's a very exciting time to actually be in the Navy and the Marine Corps. And when I reflect back on, again, when I came in 1979, I look at the investments that are being made today. We're on the breakthrough of a technological revolution in so many different ways. And the investments that we made in our platforms and our people, say 15 years ago, for example, are just coming to fruition right now, for example. And so when you look at, capabilities like the Ford aircraft carrier, for example, the USS Ford, right? And you look at, our Flight 3 Arleigh Burke destroyers, and you look at the transformational changes that are happening in the Marine Corps, right? And some of the developments of things like Nemesis and hopefully the future law. And it's just very, very exciting to be. And I think I see that as I call it management by walking around, right? You got to get out of the Pentagon. You got to hear it straight from the horse's mouth, the good, the bad, the ugly. And I do, and I ask a lot of hard questions. And I try to dig deep to ensure that I understand truly what, our sailors and our Marines are experiencing. It's very important to do that, not just to have one perception of what you think they are experiencing.
Mm-hmm. So when you're out there, so we have a question here. Let me go to this question from the fleet. Robert Boyce is asking, what's being done to upgrade the seamanship training and practice at sea? And I would take that question and kind of building on what you're talking about what the motivation and the training they're seeing. There's some thinking about from us old retired guys that are the sailors getting the training they need at sea,
right,
on a deck plate, seamanship, that classic operating the ship, driving the ship kind of stuff. What do you think?
And Admiral, I talk often about how incredibly important it is for us to actually establish a culture of warfighting excellence, right? And that culture of warfighting excellence has to be founded in proper training across the board for our sailors and our officers, both in the Navy and the Marine Corps. It's incredibly important. And as I came into this role, for example, one of the questions I had is, how much have we improved from, and have we learned the lessons that needed to be learned from the McCain and the Fitzgerald accidents that took place back in 2017? And so I dove right into that, and I talked to a lot of folks, and I actually spent a lot of time up in Newport trying to get a better understanding, a direct understanding of the investments that the Navy had made or hadn't made. And I walked away from the experience quite impressed, actually. We have invested millions, if not billions of dollars now, in trying to correct the mistakes that were made in both those tragic accidents, and in trying to improve this culture of warfighting excellence by investing in simulators, for example, that far outweigh anything that I was exposed to when I was a junior officer in the Navy, in terms of really putting our sailors, our watch professionals, both officers and enlisted, who stand watches on the bridge of a ship, in the most challenging of situations in a simulator, so that they can actually, once they get out to the fleet, they could actually put those lessons to practice. We've also moved a lot of those training opportunities out directly to the fleet as well too, so that they don't have to always come back to Newport or Norfolk, but in the major concentrations where we have our ships, so that we can minimize the impact on manning on those ships while sailors have to undergo training.
So sticking with training for one more question here, boot camp.
Yes.
So recently in the press, boot camp extended 2 weeks.
Yes.
Huge investment in time and money. What was behind that?
I think it's well worth it as well. I think the additional 2 weeks that the CNO and the N1 Admiral Nowell are investing in our sailors at the early stages of their career to set them in the right direction across the board is critically important, and it's a worthwhile investment in every possible way.
Thanks. All right, let me shift the conversation a little broader here. For the first time since Gallup has been measuring it, which is, as far as I know, decades. Believe me, back in my day, we were tracking it. In the most recent poll, for the first time ever, the American people said that the Navy was the most important to national security. Let me make sure I get the numbers here. 28% of Americans believe the Navy is most important, 27% for the Air Force, and 20% for the Army. What is your reaction to that poll? It's great to be on top, but on the other hand, 28%.
Sure.
What's your thinking about that poll?
Well, since the beginning of time, since we established the Navy in the United States, in my humble opinion, the Navy has really been at the center of defending our global economy in many ways. The same applied back in the 19th century as it applies today. And the Navy plays an incredibly important role in defending our sea lanes of communications, now so more than ever. And when you take a look at the amount of commerce that now, just in the last 10 years alone, it's quadrupled, basically, the amount of commerce that flows on the seas. Those Amazon packages that come to your front doorstep, they get there because of the United States Navy in so many different ways. And when you take a look at the number of fiber optic lines, for example, that travel on the seabed today, in 1990 or so, there was one. Today, there's over 400. And the amount of international commerce that takes place over those fiber optic lines. These are all capabilities, modern capabilities, that the Navy protects, so that we can have a very strong economy, a global economy that we can depend on. And that's why the Navy is sort of at the forefront in defending that global economy.
So you use the expression defending the global economy. If I can, let me do a trip around the world.
Sure.
Around the globe. And what the threats are to that commerce and the threats to our national security. And if I could just kind of just go right through them.
Sure.
Let's start with China.
Sure.
Largest Navy in the world today. Building bigger, building, they would say, better. Building islands in the Western Pacific, creating a global presence. What is your take on the Chinese threat 5-10 years? What is in your, at the outside of your inside scope for that China threat, and try to help us understand what do we mean when we say China is a threat at sea?
Well, they're very much our pacing threat, you say. I mean, as you stated, they have 350 ships today, but ship count alone isn't the only metric that we should be paying attention to. We also have to pay attention to the capabilities that those ships have, right, and the gross tonnage and all those sort of things. And we are extremely capable Navy, in my humble opinion, beyond what China holds today. But having said that, though, we have to be very serious about the growth. In 2020, they constructed 32 warships. Last year, they constructed 31 warships. They have 17 shipyards in China that they rely upon to build their military vessels, but also their commercial vessels, many of which are built to military grade as well, too. So we simply cannot ignore that. And also, when you look at the capability of their modern-day cruisers, for example, their Type 55 cruisers and their Type 52 destroyers, they're far more capable than when they first started building those ships as well, too. So they are the pacing threat, and that's why we have to ensure that we strengthen our own efforts to basically maintain our maritime dominance and defense of our national security and our national security interests in particular. And that's why I'm confident in working with both the Secretary of Defense, the President, the Congress. We will make those necessary investments to make sure that we maintain a proper pace to keep up with what China is doing. Left unchecked, they'll probably have a Navy of about 450 ships by the end of the decade, and that's substantial. But it also involves a lot of other things that I'm happy to talk about as well, too, and this collective integrated deterrence strategy that the Department and the Department of the Navy has embraced.
Yeah, we'll talk a little bit more about platforms and that strategy maybe in the second block, if we can. Let's talk about Russia.
Sure.
Vladimir Putin is rattling his saber a little bit around Ukraine, but that's not new to the Navy. Black Sea ops, they've been doing for a while, flying airplanes over our ships. And what do you think of the Russian threat as they try to have a larger than real presence around the country, around the world?
We've seen this show before, and as a junior officer, I sailed in the Black Sea, chased Russian submarines in the Med and the Black Sea, and chased Russian ships around the Black Sea. And here they are again today, threatening Ukraine, an independent democratic country, bullying them in the way that some communist countries typically do, right? And there's a common theme behind the actions that Russia takes and the actions that China takes as well, too. And it's very, very unfortunate, and I do hope that our integrated deterrence strategy across the whole of government actually does succeed in convincing Putin not to invade the Ukraine. But if they choose to do so, I fear that the consequences that they will create will actually be worse off for them in the long run, as we clearly see their intentions. And I'm quite confident that NATO will stand up at that point and bring more forces to bear in defense of NATO, the countries that surround Ukraine. And so the consequences may turn out to be worse for Vladimir Putin than he initially hoped for in the long run.
So you mentioned NATO. What's been your experience so far as Secretary with NATO, with Commander of Naval Forces Europe, and the solidarity of the alliance, both from a strategic as well as an operational perspective?
Absolutely. I mean, the relationship is as strong as it's ever been. And just in the past 10 years, for example, we've operated together far more than we had in any previous decade. And that continues to this day. And whether it's at sea or on land, we're working very collaboratively together. We're investing in each other's technologies so that they become interoperable, and also so that they become irreplaceable to each other, basically, so they can stand in when we're not there, and we can share those opportunities as well. When you look at the number of exercises that we're conducting around the globe, for example, it's extraordinary, and at a pace that far exceeds what's been done in the last couple of decades, whether it be in the northern Baltic or in the Mediterranean, whether it be in coordination with the Norwegians or the French. The relationships are really strong.
So let's keep going around. I could actually talk about either China or Russia for the rest of the show.
Sure, I'm sure we could.
But let's talk about the Arabian Gulf.
Sure.
Continuing draw on naval forces. Iraq, we're out of Iraq, we're out of Afghanistan. Is the Arabian Gulf and Iran and the surrounding countries. Is that still a major draw for your naval forces, Navy, Marine Corps?
Oh, very much so. I mean, the Arabian Gulf will always be a strategic region of importance to the national security interests of the United States, and the Navy will always be ever ready to meet the threat wherever it may present itself in the Arabian Gulf. But obviously, we're trying our best to shift focus to the Indo-Pacific to deter China from its goal of one day invading Taiwan. And it's important for us to be able to shift some of those resources, accept risks in certain areas where we can tolerate to do so, in order to be able to deter China and deter Russia from doing what it wants to do as well too in certain regions.
So one final region, the Caribbean, South America.
Sure.
A lot of naval forces, littoral combat ships are down there, pretty active down there. How do you see Fourth Fleet and the operations there in the Caribbean, South America developing?
Again, it's, deterring China is a global challenge in many ways. They have actually tried to make many economic investments around the world in Africa and in South America and Central America. And so it's important for us to always be engaged in every possible way. Now, how you engage takes different forms at different moments in time. I myself have had a lot of interactions, for example, with the heads of navies in South America and Central America already in my short tenure as Secretary of the Navy to try to better understand the challenges that those nations face and how the United States, from an integrated deterrence perspective, a whole of government perspective, can work more closely with those governments to try to achieve interests that mutually benefit both our countries. So USAID plays a very important role, for example, in Central and South America, as they do in Africa as well too. And it's important for us to come to the table with a whole, all sorts of tools in the toolkits to be able to work with them so that they understand that, the investments that sometimes China makes in their countries have dual purpose investments, and they're not always very clear and in the best interest of the host nation as well.
So you mentioned Africa before. It's just as a last region, if I could mention it, engagement with nations on the African continent. How are we doing there, and do you see that continuing to grow as it has been?
I think we continue to engage them aggressively. One of the investments that we've made in the ESBs, for example, and the Herschel Woody Williams.
ESBs? Expeditionary platforms.
Yes. Yes. And
the Woody Williams.
The Woody Williams, for example. And she has circumnavigated Africa almost twice now, meeting with smaller nations, engaging with them in really substantive ways to try to assist in every possible way, getting to understand the problems that these nations face, and trying to build a far greater maritime domain awareness with them. One of the greatest threats that countries in Africa and South America face, for example, isn't a direct maritime confrontation. It's really violations of the fishing rights and their exclusive economic zones that are critically important to these nations for the survival of their economy and their people. And again, this is another area that China has violated other countries' sovereignty in many ways, actually, and it's the one that hurts them more so than others economically. So it's important to be partnered with these countries in different places to be able to assist them in every possible way.
So we've got a question here from the platform, from the audience, from Scott Shepard, and I think you've addressed it, but I kind of want to drill down on the Woody Williams discussion more about different ways you're doing. The question Scott Shepard asks is how are the Navy and our allies working to deter Russian PRC from their increasingly aggressive actions? And I think Scott might be leaning towards a presence discussion, but I'd like to, you mentioned Woody Williams, and I'm not sure a lot of folks know about Woody Williams, this ship that doesn't look like anything that was there when I was in the Navy.
It's transformative in many ways.
Yeah, so what is that engagement Scott's alluding to deter Russia and China? It's on the high seas, but it's also, you're talking about it on the African continent.
Exactly. It's an expeditionary sea base, basically, and it allows us for extended period of times to move into a particular maritime region and provide direct engagement and interactions with the forces of those nations that we're engaged with in that for a longer period of extended times. And so it allows us to bring in special forces. It allows us to bring in a lot of other capabilities, for example, that really strengthen the partnerships and the relationships to provide these countries with greater domain awareness in that particular region. So if you're trying to counter, illegal fishing, for example, off the Pacific coast of South America or off of Africa. These are the capabilities that we can employ to work with these host nations to effectively do that and gain much greater awareness of what's actually going on in those regions.
So in that engagement part, let me bring in the Marine Corps, because I know you're pretty adamant that you're the Secretary of the Navy, which is the Marine Corps and the Navy.
Absolutely, one team, one fight.
Exactly. So the Marines are on a path to really rethink their strategy, and you've been an advocate for Navy Marine Corps shared strategy, shared efforts together. How do you see that Navy Marine Corps integration proceeding? Where are we going?
And let me take it back one step and share with you that from my perspective, the Department of the Navy really does have a strong strategy. It's a very strong strategy, a very clear strategy. And perhaps we haven't done as good a job as communicating that strategy in the past to all of our stakeholders, whether they be on Capitol Hill or in the media or elsewhere. But it's a really strong strategy, and it's really founded on three principles. One is strengthening that domain superiority that's necessary to defend our country and protect our national security interests around the globe. The second part of that is empowering our people. It's building this culture of warfighting excellence that's so incredibly important to everything that we do across the entire Department of the Navy. And the third component to our strategy is really building far more stronger relationships with our partners and allies. You want to talk about ship count? Let's talk about a 400-ship Navy, a 500-ship Navy, a 600-ship Navy, made up of all the platforms and capabilities that all our allies and partners bring together, working together to deter our adversaries around the globe, right? That's real strength. That's real power projection. And that's our strategy moving forward. So it's incredibly important. At the tactical level and at the operational level, General Berger has come up with Force Design 2030. And I spent an enormous amount of time looking at it, studying it, understanding what it was all about. And it's a sound strategy. And it's been implemented for the last couple of years, and we continue to implement it. And on the Navy side, we have the CNO's op plan, basically, which is founded or structured around this concept that we need to have distributed maritime operations around the globe, right? So that platforms almost become separated from the actual missile system and the intelligence system that feeds that missile system to provide the targeting data to strike a particular target, wherever it may come from, whether it comes from the air, the sea, the land, undersea, wherever it may come from. And so, this is a sound strategy. It really is, based on sound operations, concept of operations, and tactical procedures that make sense. What we got to do is we got to fund it. We got to fund it properly, and I think we're going to talk about that later.
So, Mr. Secretary, I have to tell you, I think that is the strongest statement of the Department of the Navy strategy that I've heard.
Sure.
Some people, question where's the strategy, where's forward from the sea or whatever. That's the strongest statement that we have a strategy. And it sounds to me like what you're saying is let's go do it.
We're going to go do it, and we're going to communicate it more clearly to our stakeholders on Capitol Hill and elsewhere around the globe. And then we got to fund it. We got to fund it, we got to back it up, and we got to execute it. So I'm really excited about the future, which is why I said earlier, it's a great time to be in the Department of the Navy.
All right, sounds good. Mr. Secretary, we're going to take a short break, and then we're going to come back and we're going to talk about just that.
Sure.
All right, thank you very much for joining us. Again, short break, and we'll be right back. Stay tuned.
LMI was a success almost from the beginning.
In 2005, when I joined LMI, we were getting ready to celebrate our 45th, and now we're on our 60th.
That's our legacy. The premier logistics consulting company in the government consulting space. Let's be enormously proud of that.
We're looking at, delivery of the future, right? Those are the things that we are able to impact.
The people we serve at Navy Mutual are like family.
Navy Mutual is a nonprofit organization
that was founded in 1879,
providing life insurance products,
service and education to members of the military service and their families.
We understand them because we have served ourselves.
Everything we do every day is about serving our members.
We treat them like
treat our family. It's all about the member.
We started with computers. We didn't stop at computers. We didn't stop at storage or cloud. We kept going, working with our customers to enable a kind of technology that can guide an astronaut back to safety and help make a hospital come to you instead of you going to it. So when it comes to your business, you know we'll stop at nothing.
Welcome back. As we said in the beginning of the program, we've got on the platform an opportunity for you to ask questions and as well as like the answers. Please, we'll try to stick with the theme here. There's a couple that I think are pretty personally focused, but let's try to keep it strategic. But keep them coming. Mr. Secretary, I want to keep going from where we stopped.
Sure.
I almost didn't want to stop. Integrated deterrence.
Sure.
You drove that pretty hard.
I did.
Let's keep talking about that. Do we have what we need in the Navy, in the Marine Corps, for our part of that integrated defense? And kind of draw out where you're thinking on that idea of integrated defense.
Well, Admiral, in the past 20 years, the Navy basically has participated in a very important land battle against terrorists in the Middle East. And as we now shift our overall defense strategy and national strategy from one of just combating or participating in land wars to the threat in the Indo-Pacific and elsewhere around the globe, it's incredibly important to be able to rethink what your strategy is. And that's where I said that I think General Berger and Admiral Gilday have done a good job in taking a look at what operational concepts are now necessary in the Pacific and elsewhere to become more expeditionary, more mobile, and what investments have to be made both in platforms and people to help get us there. And part of that is it's integrated deterrence. It's about using all the capabilities that the United States has and also our allies and partners around the globe collectively together and across the entire federal government as well too, because it just doesn't, the complications of the countries in Africa and South America aren't just military problems. They're economic problems. And so you have to approach it from a whole government perspective. How can we build better trade agreements with countries around the globe so that they can become stronger in their own economies? And climate change is presenting serious threats around the globe. There's no question about that. The fight for fresh water everywhere in Africa and South America is becoming a real problem. And so we have to look at it from a very holistic perspective and a whole of government perspective. That's what integrated deterrence is all about. So you're a naval officer, you're a businessman. When you talk about integrated deterrence, trying to get you to talk about Department of the Navy. Mm-hmm. When you're talking to your board members, sure,
Congress, when you're talking to your shareholders, the American people, and as you build budgets, do you have the capabilities that you need how do you answer the board members?
Sure.
Do you have the capabilities you need to do the missions you're being asked to do in the Department of the Navy?
Well, you have to look at the threat and the nature of the threat in that particular region, right? Mm-hmm. And so the nature of the threat in the Indo-Pacific, and if we want to deter China from eventually one day taking over Taiwan, I hope it never comes to that. I hope we never come to conflict with China. It's all about deterrence is what it's about. But we need capabilities there that are significant. And so I think that this 23 budget and this 24, even the 22 budget is critically important to fulfilling that mission. And the 23 budget and the 24 budget will as well. And so we're trying to rescope our capabilities in directions that help us better deter China and Russia from doing what they want to do globally.
So that makes sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
I live in this world.
Sure.
Some people say that we historically in the Navy and the Marine Corps don't do a good job explaining that very thing to the taxpayer, to the shareholder.
Sure.
What does that mean? Congressman Larrea has taken us to task, several others have taken us to task, that says we've got to do a better job making our case. How do you put that, what you just said about China and the threat, how do you put that in words for people who don't follow this every day so they
Absolutely.
can better understand?
Absolutely. Well, first and foremost, you got to be present. If you're going to be a threat to another nation, who's an adversary, you got to be present. So we need to move a lot of our forces forward. They need to be. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're building permanent bases in other countries, but you're building better relationships with other countries in the Indo-Pacific, right? And you're leveraging each other's capabilities, as I said earlier, as well too. It also means you have to be more expeditionary. You've got to be able to move around quicker. You've got to be able to move forces around quicker. So if you look at the Marine Corps, for example, and how they move their, what they refer to as their Marine Logistics Regiments, basically, their MLRs, for example, they're going to need smaller, faster ships to move those logistics around once they're in theater, for example, to deter China in every possible way. We can talk about LCSs as well, too. My strategy is, let's put naval strike missiles on those ships, and let's use them very, very aggressively to work very closely with the Marine Corps, right? Become a far greater deterrent to the Chinese inside the first island chain as well, too. And so these are all capabilities that we're looking at differently and employing different concepts of operations to meet the different threat that we face in the Indo-Pacific compared to what we were doing traditionally in the Arabian Gulf.
So let me drill down there on the LCS comment. So you're looking at making those ships more combat ready, more combat effective.
Absolutely.
Not ready, but effective, more of a strike weapon than they are today.
Absolutely so. It's incredibly important. This is an investment that the American taxpayers have made for the Department of the Navy, and we're still commissioning new ships, and we're going to use those ships very aggressively into the future. It isn't the main capability that we will present in deterring China. There's, we need to talk about hypersonics and putting hypersonics on Zumwalt-class ships, for example. We need longer-range fires. We need capabilities in space and cybersecurity to counter China in every possible way. But it is one tool in the toolkit that we have a responsibility to use very aggressively in the Indo-Pacific, and we'll use it on other missions in Fourth Fleet, for example, in South America to continue our efforts in countering drugs, for example, which has been a very effective platform for that because they move around so quickly as well, too. And we'll use them for many other missions very creatively. We're exploring some of those missions now with the Marine Corps, for example.
So let's stay with surface ships for a little bit. A topic not near and dear to your heart, probably for two reasons. One, your background, but two, the Surface Navy Association last week, I thought that was arguably one of the bigger pep rallies that I've seen in my life. But there's a lot going on in the surface force.
There is.
And arguably, we look at the early 20s, it's going to be a different Navy in the future.
It is.
The frigate that's coming, the destroyer that you've just announced, the hull. What do you see the future, again, the China threat and all that, what do you see the future of the surface fleet?
I think it's very exciting. Like I said earlier, it's a great time to be in the Navy and a great time to be a surface warfare officer as well, too. When you look at DDG, with unquestionably is the workhorse of our fleet in so many different ways. We've now moved on to Flight 3 DDG with just incredible capability, approaching that of a cruiser or even well beyond a cruiser today, especially with the Block 10 Aegis weapon system on it now, which brings tremendous capabilities to the table. When you look at the Constellation-class frigate, that's going to be a very important platform well into the future. I hope we can build many of those well into the future. And then again, you look at LCS, as we said, which will play a role, but you look at how we're using ESBs, for example, and EPFs and other platforms. These are all collectively important platforms that will have many multi-purpose missions, basically, to address the high-end threat against China, but also all the day-to-day responsibilities that we have in the Department of the Navy to protect our national security and our people around the globe, for example, of which the amphibious Navy also plays an important role.
So what do you tell the board of directors up on Capitol Hill about the new destroyer? Is it a significant leap in technology? Is it an evolution from the DDG Flight 3s? What is that ship going to be?
Okay, so I consider the new destroyer as the Flight 3 DDGs, actually, but we're talking about DDGX. I think that's what you're asking me.
Right.
No, absolutely. I think, it's always important to look ahead to the future requirements that are necessary. One of the limiting factors of the Arleigh Burke hull, obviously, is you can only put so much power on it, for example, to support some of the greatest technology that's rolling off, out of industry, basically lasers in particular, for example. But I think it's also very important to ensure that we build those when they're ready to be built, right? We experiment, we do a lot of land-based testing on both their engineering plants and their weapon systems as well too, so that we don't get ahead of ourselves and we actually start building them once we understand the capabilities that are going to go on them, the concept of operations for those ships as well too. You know, something that's very important and to our future Navy is going to be how we use our unmanned vehicles across the board, for example, right? So I'm very excited by Task Force 59, you know, and what the work that they're doing, which is basically our unmanned experimental task force to deploy and have all these different systems, airborne, surface, and subsurface, sort of work together, right? So we're developing these concept operations, and that has to be integrated with all new platforms that we develop well into the future. It's incredibly important. But we don't want to get ahead of ourselves either. We want to be able to build ships once we fully understand the concept of operations for those platforms, what technologies are going to go on those platforms, how mature those technologies are to meet the requirements, and then we will commit ourselves to actually developing those new platforms.
That is a huge challenge, which you just talked about, right? It's an expensive challenge. You know, when you talk about unmanned vehicles, especially just surface ships, unmanned surface ships, the whole concept of operations and the challenge of unmanned, lightly manned. How do you convince the Congress, the American people, that it's worthwhile to invest in those sort of platforms, knowing that in 25 years we're going to look back and go, wow, we've gotten a lot better in 25 years. But,
right.
You know,
well, it may slow down how quickly we can get some of those platforms out, right? Because we're taking a lot longer to actually invest in the research and development that goes into those technologies and those platforms to make sure that they work, right? When you take a look at the Zumwalt-class destroyer, for example, the DDG-1000 series, you know, we made some pretty broad leaps in thinking that the advanced gun system would actually work. And we invested billions of dollars into the advanced gun system, only to discover, you know, 15 to 20 years later that we weren't going to get there, right? We got to make sure that the technologies that we employ on these platforms actually work before we actually put them on there. And a lot of that has to do with experimentation, right? So, you know, perhaps a better strategy might be to build a few more DDG Flight 3s to get, you know, to ensure that we have the capacity necessary to deter China and do the other things that we need to do until such moment in time when DDGX or SSGX are actually ready to deploy.
So you mentioned hypersonics, you mentioned Zumwalt destroyers a couple times. I don't want to take you too close to the classified area because I know one thing you're focused on is not making it too easy for the adversary here.
Absolutely.
But talk to me about the leap into hypersonics for the U.S. Navy.
So, you know, as a department, actually as a Department of Defense, we're investing a lot of resources in hypersonics and have been for quite a long time. We just don't talk about all the things that we do. But it's incredibly important. I mean, development of hypersonic missiles as a deterrent to what China and Russia are doing is incredibly, incredibly important. And we must be invested in that. We must be invested in cybersecurity. We must be invested in space, for example, as well, too. And while I can't talk about a lot of those investments, let me assure the American people that we're making some very wise investments in all those areas.
So speaking about what you can't speak about a lot, let's talk about submarines.
Sure.
Columbia-class submarine, huge investment. Ballistic missile submarine, we've gotten so much out of the Tridents in the past. Where is that on your priority list, and what's the status of that incredibly expensive program?
Well, in many ways, Columbia is the number one procurement priority for the Department of the Navy. We have to ensure that our nuclear capabilities are modernized and invested in properly. And when you take a look at the Ohio-class submarine and the Columbia-class submarine, there's very little room for gaps and errors in how we transition those two platforms. So we're trying to do everything we can to make sure that we've got, you know, a stable workforce in the industrial base to support that transition so that we can actually produce a Columbia, hopefully at a year, once a year, you know, well into the future.
So sticking with submarines a little bit, it seems like the attack submarine purchase plan is on track.
Yeah, it is.
and now unmanned underwater vehicles, probably an area you probably can't talk about times two.
Yeah, exactly.
But are you comfortable with where we are in the undersea platforms?
I am comfortable. I really do have the confidence that the investments that were made 10 years ago, for example, that are coming to fruition today are really going to pay off in a big way. And as the Secretary of the Navy, I have a fiscal and a program management responsibility to make sure that those programs are managed very tightly, very responsibly, and that the shipbuilders are doing what they have to do to keep costs down and to stay on schedule. And I like some of the investments that the shipyards are making, for example, in technology to try to advance that so that we can actually build these ships far faster than we have in the past. It's incredibly important, and it's important for them to stay disciplined in that endeavor as well, too, so that we can deliver these ships on time and on budget for the American people.
So we have a lot of good questions coming in here. Some we've touched on. Some I'm kind of folding into my other questions.
Sure.
Let's talk about the aircraft carrier.
Absolutely.
Celebrating a 100-year anniversary this year. I'm going to put a plug in, I guess. If there's one military platform over the last 100 years in the United States of America that's been the most used strategically or deterrence, it's got to be the aircraft carrier.
Absolutely.
Taking a while to build them. We got Ford coming out, John F. Kennedy on the way. Where are you on aircraft carriers?
I think they're great. I mean, they are, the best tool in the toolkit to project power globally, worldwide. Anytime we have a crisis, it's no joke. The President does ask, where's the nearest aircraft carrier? The Secretary of Defense asks, and I ask, where's the nearest aircraft carrier? Typically, we know where they are.
Yeah.
But, and just today, you look at the crisis in Ukraine, for example, and the Harry S. Truman is deployed in the Mediterranean, standing by for missions assigned as necessary to protect our people who live in Ukraine and protect our national security interests in the Mediterranean as well, too. So, yeah, they are at the epicenter of our fleet, and I suspect they'll always be there as well, too.
So, yeah, we have another example. Where's the carrier? Harry S. Truman in the Med, part of 6th Fleet, ready if called upon.
And by the way, the Carl Vinson in the South China Sea as well, too, with one of our ARGs. So, today we have about 135,000 people that are operationally deployed across the globe. We have upwards of 50 ships that are deployed around the globe as well, too. We are ready to meet our primary mission of defending our national security interests in support of the American people. And that's why they have confidence in the Department of the Navy every day.
So staying on aircraft carriers for a minute, we saw a little bit of a spike discussions about light aircraft carriers.
Sure.
Where is the Department of the Navy today, and where are you going on the Hill with the idea of a light aircraft carrier?
Well, they're called LHAs.
I got it. Okay.
In many ways, right? Look, I think we need to continue to make improvements in our aircraft carriers, and we've done that with the USS Ford. And granted, there have been difficulties in getting Ford to be where she is today, but we're there. She's going to deploy this year very successfully, I imagine. And we've corrected the problems with her elevators. We've got a new catapult, basically, that is transformational and allows us to increase our sortie rates. Those are the types of things that we need to do to continue to, project power more quickly in operationally astute manners to defeat our enemies. And so I'm very excited by our aircraft carriers.
So what's the right number of aircraft carriers and carrier battle groups? So, and how much use are you getting out of them? Because one of the things that we talk about, when we talk about the number of aircraft carriers, platforms, but back in the day when you and I were junior officers, one aircraft carrier wasn't equal to one aircraft carrier today.
Sure,
so
absolutely.
Where are you on the number of aircraft carriers we need and the number of aircraft carriers need to be deployed?
Well, I don't want to focus, specifically on one number, but the requirement has been 11 to 12 aircraft carriers, and I fully support that number.
Got it. What's the flight deck of the future look like?
It's a combined flight deck with many different types of capabilities. And that's why it's also important to talk about, the air wing is the weapon system of that platform in so many different ways. And so having the right number of F-18 ENFs on the aircraft carrier, F-35s on the aircraft carrier, is the right strategy and the right approach. I'm very excited, obviously, by the technical capability that the F-35 brings to bear in deterring our aggressors in the air in so many different ways. And so it's finding that right combination between those two aircraft that's incredibly important.
And where are you on the Marines deploying the F-35 on carriers?
I'm all for it.
But we're doing it now, right?
We are doing it now. And not only are we doing it now, but we've deployed the F-35Bs on the Izumo, which is the Japanese converted destroyer version of their aircraft carrier.
Yeah.
And did it very, very successfully. And so this is the way of the future. Again, it speaks to that sort of combined Navy with all our allies and partners fielding similar platforms with similar capabilities that we can truly integrate into one expeditionary strike group or amphibious readiness group.
So let me ask a question here we have from the audience. We talk about integrated deterrence. And I don't think I just want to make sure, are you making a case that integrated deterrence allows for fewer ships, smaller Navy? How does that affect your discussions on Capitol Hill about the need for the Navy?
Sure. Well, it's not just fewer ships or fewer navies. It's about meeting the many demands. You mentioned I was a small business owner. I was a small business owner for 17 years. And the one thing I learned as a small business owner is that you never have enough resources to do everything that you want to do. Mm-hmm. And oh, by the way, the threats are always greater than what you can afford to actually, put up against those threats. And so there is more than enough threats and demands across the entire globe. And it actually does require us to act responsibly together as allies and partners working together so that, the French can cover areas of operations that perhaps we can't have as much presence in at any one particular time, whether it be in the Pacific or off the coast of Africa. Or, we've been deploying other nations' ships along with our own carrier battle groups far more aggressively than we have in the past as well, too, probably since World War II, you might argue. Mm-hmm. And it's been very, very effective. And so we need to continue to do this in every possible way, creatively, to create that integrated deterrence that serves our nation far better than doing anything different.
So let me wrap up the
And Admiral, if I could just add one other thing.
Sure.
This is the huge advantage that we have over the Chinese and the Russians, because we do have significant allies and partners that are perfectly willing to work with us day in and day out to protect the norms of behavior across the entire globe. The Chinese and the Russians really don't have that. And so they're operating very much independently and doing what they're trying to do.
So I don't even know how to build on that point because that's such a great point. But let me take it back to how we contribute to those partners.
Sure.
And to wrap up the budget discussion, because that's your battle. That's your battle on the Hill, and you've already created a lot of great relationships up there. You had them when you came into the job. But and some of the questions from the audience are really zeroing in on this, and it goes back to the first question: do you have what you need to do all
Sure.
these things you're talking about doing? Are you comfortable with the top line?
Well, I'm never comfortable.
Really?
With the top line, absolutely. A good leader is never comfortable with the resources that one has. Always fighting for more. But I want to make sure I'm clear also. The Navy has a responsibility, both the Marine Corps and the Navy, to fight within a joint warfighting concept. And that demands that we work very, very closely with our friends in the Department of the Air Force and the Department of the Army as well, too, in support of the combatant commanders all around the globe. And what you do in the Med, what you do in the Middle East is incredibly important to what happens in the Pacific and vice versa. So we really do have challenges around the globe that we have to work effectively within a joint warfighting concept. It's our contribution to that joint warfighting concept that's critical in the Indo-Pacific. And that's why, given the challenges and the shift in strategy from the Middle East and the land wars that we've fought in the last 20 years to this Indo-Pacific strategy, our Navy Marine Corps team is going to need more resources to do what it needs to do. And I'm confident that the Department of Defense and the President, it's the President's budget, and we support that budget in every possible way. They're going to invest the right resources in order for us to be able to protect the American people in every possible way.
God bless you on that battle. So let me, got a bunch of COVID questions in here.
Sure.
Before we wrap up, let me talk COVID. Interestingly, just to give some perspective, this event, everybody that put this event together is masked up. You came in with a mask. I had a mask on. We're 6 feet away or more. We're very serious about this. It just seems to me it's got to be having an impact out there. I mean, the challenges we've talked about for the last hour, and then you throw on that destroyer COVID.
Sure.
I don't necessarily want to zero in. A couple ships have had COVID, but what's the impact? I guess twofold question. First is, what's the impact on the fleet? And then I'm going to come to the medical community in a second.
Well, you know, we work in operational environments that are stressful enough as it is, right? And so you overlay COVID onto this, and it stresses our Marines, our sailors, our civilians in every possible way, which is why I have been making the argument, as has the Secretary of Defense and the President of the United States. It's incredibly important to be vaccinated, and I'm very proud that sailors and Marines and civilians in the Department of the Navy have stepped up the way they have to become vaccinated, so that we can have the confidence in each other that we can interact in ways that we need to in order to maintain combat readiness, because it really is about combat readiness, right? And so you know that we deploy our ships and our squadrons and our submarines and our Marines in very close quarters around the globe. And it's important for them to be as safe as possible by being vaccinated. And again, I'm so proud of our sailors and Marines and the way that they've stepped up.
Yeah, and you know, numbers, as you said earlier, are
Sure.
kind of dangerous, right, when you talk about
Of
ships.
course.
But it's also about sailors. I mean, you've got almost 1 million people in the Department of the Navy, and you're talking several thousand. You still have several thousand people who aren't getting vaccinated for some reason.
Right.
You're battling that challenge. How is that going?
I think it's going well. I think we've afforded these individuals some added time to really think hard about the choices that they need to make with regards to vaccination. We've taken a look at medical exemptions and religious exemptions and just refusals in general. But now we're at the point, quite frankly, where people are going to have to step up and either decide that they do want to become vaccinated, or they're going to have to look for some other line of work, because it's too important to keep my other sailors and Marines and civilians safe. We don't have the luxury of being able to telecommute in the United States Navy or the Department of Defense in general. Sure, there's some telecommuting that can happen, but certainly at the pointy end of the spear, it's kind of hard to telecommute on an aircraft carrier or a destroyer or a submarine, right? It just doesn't work that way. And so it's really important to ensure that people follow orders, get the vaccination, and if they choose not to, unfortunately, I think they're going to have to look for some other line of work.
Can't say it any straighter than that.
No.
Right? How's the medical community doing? Stretched? Working hard?
I worry about our medical community. I'm so proud of them. As you probably have heard, the President and the Secretary of Defense are employing many of these medical response teams around the country to help our fellow Americans in places where the rates of COVID are just going through the roof. In many cases, largely because they're not vaccinated. Admiral, in the United States Navy, both the Department of the Navy, both the Marine Corps and the Navy, we've lost 19 active duty sailors and Marines to COVID. Not one of those was unvaccinated. Not one. We've had 167 deaths, more or less, on the civilian side of the house as well, too. And in large numbers, most of those have been unvaccinated. That's just the reality in which we live in, which is why it's so incredibly important for all of our personnel to simply just get vaccinated so they can protect themselves, their families, our children, from this horrible disease that has touched all Americans and has touched people all around the globe.
What a great way to wrap up and focus on the challenges that our sailors and Marines are focused on doing out there, and to thank them.
Could I just say one last thing? I
Please
just want
do.
to thank the American people and your viewers and your supporters of the Navy Memorial for the support that they've provided our Navy and our Marine Corps, our sailors, our Marines, our civilian personnel. We have many challenges in the Navy. I often see them as opportunities to do things better. But it's because of the support of the American people that we can actually do the jobs that we do and protecting them. And I'm just so deeply grateful, and finally wanted to say thanks again for the opportunity for me to serve. I work for those sailors and Marines and civilians. I work for you as the American taxpayer.
Mr. Secretary, thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks for leading our Navy, leading our Marine Corps, coming back in a different uniform, different clothes, but coming back to serve when some would say there was a greener pasture, and you took the high road.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thanks for joining us for SITREP today. It's been a pleasure, real pleasure, speaking with you today.
Appreciate it, Admiral.
All right. So thank you for joining us. What a great conversation with the Secretary of the Navy, Carlos del Toro. I want to say thank you again to our sponsors who brought this. We couldn't do it without them, and they bring us these shows, these programs that we do. LMI, the event sponsor, thank you very much to LMI and Sink Harris and the team, as well as to our co-sponsors, Navy Mutual and Dell Technologies. Thank you very much. Like I said earlier, we have a great schedule coming up for you in 2022. We got a good one coming to you in February we're still putting together. And until then, stay safe and fair winds and following seas.